Oh, and welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker in Lagos. We begin with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who arrived in Vilnius, Lithuania for the NATO summit, but not before hitting out on NATO leadership regarding the issue of Ukraine's membership of the North Atlantic body. Mr. Zelensky accused NATO leaders of showing disrespect to Ukraine by refusing to offer a timetable for when it will be invited to join the military alliance. He complained about the lack of readiness to invite Ukraine to join, giving Russia the opportunity to continue its terror by leaving open the possibility for it to bargain over Ukraine's future membership in any peace deal. NATO leaders are meeting today in the Lithuanian capital to agree the summit's final declaration, but Mr. Zelensky has complained a draft of its intention about Ukraine is not sufficient. Well, the Ukrainian president's impatience with NATO probably stems from the fact that last night, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan agreed to forward to Parliament Sweden's bid to join NATO's military alliance. The announcement was made by NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg Monday. He declined to give a date for when Sweden's accession would be ratified by the Turkish Parliament, the Grand Assembly, which would decide on the exact timing. Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO last year, casting aside policies of military non-alignment that had lasted through the decades of the Cold War as Russia's invasion of Ukraine reframed security considerations.
I'm glad to announce that as a result, President Erdogan has agreed to forward the accession protocol for Sweden to the Grand National Assembly as soon as possible, and work closely with the Assembly to ensure ratification. Turkey and Sweden agreed today to establish a new bilateral security compact. NATO will also significantly step up its work in this area. And I will establish for the first time at NATO the post of Special Coordinator for Counterterrorism. Completing Sweden's accession to NATO is an historic step that benefits the security of all NATO allies at this critical time. It makes us all stronger and safer. Then it's not for me to go into the details about the timelines of the different political institutions in Turkey. This is first about the President submitting the documents to the Parliament. The President has made it clear that that will happen as soon as possible, and then of course it is for the Parliament then to have the process and then do the final ratification. I will not give you exact dates for that, but this is a clear commitment, and the President has made it clear that it will happen as soon as possible. Well, Hungary has made it clear that they will not be the last to ratify, and now Turkey has made it clear that they will ratify, and there are only two countries that have not ratified. So I think that problem will be solved.
Meanwhile, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg says NATO allies should agree to remove the requirement of a membership action plan for Ukraine to become a member of the alliance in the future. NATO leaders are meeting, seeking to overcome divisions on Ukraine's membership bid.
On the membership issue, I also expect that allies will send a clear and positive message on the path forward towards membership for Ukraine. I have proposed a package of 3 elements with more practical support with a multi-year program to ensure full interoperability between the Ukrainian forces and the NATO forces. This will move Ukraine closer to NATO. Some allies are also then having a bilateral or multilateral dialogue with Ukraine on a framework to have in place to ensure continued support for Ukraine. I think it would be wrong if I go into the exact language of that and also exactly how that will be made public. But of course, this will complement and supplement the decisions made at the NATO summit. The nuclear rhetoric of Russia is dangerous and reckless, and Russia must know that a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. NATO allies are, of course, monitoring closely what Russia is doing. We condemn the announcement that Russia will deploy tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus. We are monitoring closely what they are doing. So far, we haven't seen any changes in the Russian nuclear deployments posture that requires any changes from our side, but we remain vigilant and we will ensure that we, of course, are ready to protect and defend every NATO ally against any potential threat.
Ratification process too slow.
Staying with Mr. Stoltenberg, he says NATO allies will make clear at the summit today how Ukraine can become a member of the alliance in the future. When he was asked about Russia, he also said that he's not seen a change in the country's nuclear posture, despite its announcement that it is stationing nuclear weapons in Belarus.
For NBC News.
Ukraine has come a long way since we made that decision in 2008 that the next step will be a membership action plan. Ukraine is much closer to NATO, so I think the time has come to reflect that in also the NATO decisions. All put together, including that we make clear that Ukraine will become a member, we remove the membership action plan, we make their forces interoperable with NATO forces, we establish the NATO-Ukraine Council. All that together will send a very strong and positive message from NATO to Ukraine. I'm confident that we will make strong and united decisions on Ukraine, both to sustain and step up our support. I'm also confident that on the membership issue, allies will reaffirm that Ukraine will become a member.
In the meantime, Nordic leaders have welcomed news of Sweden moving towards NATO accession following that deal struck with Turkey Monday night. The Turkish president had agreed to send Sweden's application for ratification to the Turkish parliament after Sweden announced its active support for Turkey's European Union accession process. Reacting to the news ahead of the meeting in Vilnius, where Finnish President Sauli Niinisto and Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Støre.
Few countries in NATO will be more touched by the fact that Sweden is now becoming a member. And for the first time in modern history, the entire Nordic region will be inside NATO. And that has profound positive implications for the way we plan our security, our defense, and how we will contribute positively to NATO. NATO is a threat to none. This is an organization of collective security which will be enhanced by Swedish membership.
For the first time, we are full members attending the NATO meeting. The first good news we heard already, I mean that our good neighbor, Sweden, has succeeded in their negotiations to get some green light to their membership. And that is most important for us in Finland too, not just because they are good friends and neighbors, but they are very much needed in securing the Northern European security.
But the Kremlin, on the other hand, says Sweden's accession to NATO would have clear negative implications for Russia's security and that Moscow would respond with similar measures to those it took after Finland joined the Western military alliance. Russian government spokesperson Dmitry Peskov also played down Turkey's decision to end its opposition to Sweden's accession to NATO, saying that Ankara has obligations as a member for the alliance and that Moscow had no illusions on the score. Mr. Peskov said Russia and Turkey had their differences but also shared some common interests, adding that Moscow intended to develop further its relations with Ankara. Joining me now is security expert David Otto. He joins me from the nation's capital. Hi, David. There are lots to discuss, especially with this NATO summit. Lots of expectations, Sweden's accession into NATO, and more importantly, NATO's real position on Ukraine's membership. Do you think NATO has already made that position known, going by what Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has been saying about it hours before the beginning of the summit?
Yes, of course, NATO has made the position, but this is not the final, nail in terms of, getting Sweden into the NATO alliance. Of course, the Turkish President Recep Erdogan has made it known that Turkey has now given a green light, but they still have to go back to the Turkish parliament, to get the ratification. And it is not very clear if the Turkish parliament is going to pass that. But so there's still a stage, to go through. This is another. I'm sure that this is another increase in terms of NATO's membership. If Sweden joins, following the accession of Finland, in the space of 500 days within the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we now have 2 additional members potentially joining the alliance. And, we're looking now at perhaps what happens to Ukraine next.
Do you think Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was, correct in lashing out at what appears to be this delay and what he hoped would have been a faster timing, some sort of certainty to when his country would join NATO?
Well, there are very clear procedures and eligibility criteria, in becoming a member of NATO. One of the challenges that Ukraine faces is that it is at war, and therefore it cannot join. And this is why President Zelensky had said, his country should be considered, more closer to NATO. I mean, this is the word that has been used. And then, perhaps, for Ukraine, of course, definitely for Ukraine to join after the war. But the problem is we do not know when this war is going to end and what will be the impact, at the time that this war ends in terms of the structure that Ukraine would have at the time. So President Zelensky is obviously not happy because, of course, he perhaps may have been thinking about an exceptional rule. But NATO members, will not drag, of course, Ukraine into the alliance at this point in time, because then that activates Article 5, which means they have to not just assist Ukraine in fighting Russia, but then have to put boots on the ground. An attack on one is an attack on all. So, President Zelensky may be unhappy with the slowness in terms of how he has close relations. But of course, this is, the United States President Joe Biden said, they are not yet ready. And they've just hung the country dry. And I think they just have to wait and see what happens in future.
So perhaps the question now is, with where the United States stands as, yes, they're supplying weapons to Ukraine, even the munitions, but then pulling back on support for Ukraine membership. Where could Ukraine look for that support now?
I think Ukraine relies, heavily on the United States, supply of weapons, but perhaps intelligence, reconnaissance. I don't think that, they will get much more support from any other NATO member as much as they do from the United States. Of course, the European states that do supply them with weapons and training, for example, the UK. Recently, the United States, said it will supply Ukraine with cluster bombs. This is a very controversial step, towards supplying an offensive weapon. So I think, on the one hand, President Zelensky wants to complain about the slowness in Ukraine being a member of NATO or becoming quite close to NATO. I don't know what that really means to him. But on the other hand, he understands that he cannot, at this point in time, push back, against the United States, because, the United States is the biggest donor and supplier of weapons to Ukraine. So if President Biden says, they are not ready, I don't think there's much that President Zelensky can do at this point in time. But mind you, this is just a proxy war. The United States wants to see Russia being dragged in for a long war so that it can, kind of impact on its economy, its politics, and its social development. So it is in the interest of the United States for this war to continue. And as long as the war continues, Ukraine cannot become a member of NATO.
Do you think Russia is happy with this, position or posture of NATO? And also, how would you assess Russia's reaction? And this is to Turkey's decision, in terms of Sweden and Finland joining the alliance.
I don't know how Turkey is going to balance, its relationship with Russia. Considering the fact that it relies a lot on Russia in terms of supply of gas. Turkey was one of the first countries, and President Erdogan himself, to call for some kind of a negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. Turkey has been quite close to Russia, but I think controversially, Turkey has also been supplying some drone technology to Ukraine, which of course has been used, to fight against the Russians. So I think the Turkish president is playing his cards very wisely. Of course, he talked about the fact that Sweden will, perhaps, repatriate some of the individuals who are accused of belonging to PKK and YPG, which is a terrorist group, in Turkey. He talked about the fact that, Turkey should be supported in return to assess, membership to the European Union. So Turkey is just playing its own geopolitical interest here. And perhaps, it is hurting the feelings of Russians. But again, this is something which, one has to look very closely. I think Russia would be much more concerned that, or perhaps, just, make some kind of a generalized statement that this is why they invaded Ukraine in the first place, because Ukraine was going to join NATO membership, just like Finland and Sweden are going to do. So for Russia, this is a further encroachment into its territorial, integrity. So let's see how they react. Perhaps stationing of missiles in Belarus, could be one of those steps, but too early to tell.
Another could also be the black grain deal that we're reaching that perhaps dates when it's supposed to be renewed.
Yes, of course. The West has accused Russia of weaponizing food. And specifically, Russia has been, very strategic in terms of. Russia has said the same thing, that some of the sanctions that had been levied to it and continuously been levied to Russia has also impacted its economy. So again, that may be one area where Russia would, strike harder. After the limitation of gas supply, and talking about countries buying gas in the Russian ruble. So let's see what happens. Really, but Russia will react. But how it reacts, is something that one has to see in the coming days and weeks.
Security analyst David Otto, many thanks. We always appreciate your time on the program.
Thank you.
While NATO leaders settle into major discussions today and tomorrow, reactions are mixed among Swedes about their country joining the NATO alliance. Residents of the city of Malmö say it was past time for the decision, while others worry about what being a member of the alliance might mean for young Swedes who joined the military.
It's a bit of a mixed emotions, because as a Swede I have always been proud of being in a neutral country, and the things we could do with not being members of an organizations like NATO. Then again, I don't know if it's that big of a difference, but as a father I think about my sons now. If they are joining the army or something, they can be sent away in a different way than we had before. So that I think about, and I think it's a bit worrying.
I think it was a bit of a surprise. I thought Erdogan would milk it for more stuff than he previously did. But I guess the pressure from the rest of the world, especially the States, made him cave in. I'm not sure if it's good for Sweden or bad for Sweden, but it seems like a popular choice, at least for now.
It doesn't feel serious how the arguments has been to, oh, Sweden cannot go because of this and that, and suddenly we can go in. So yeah, not serious.
I think it's about time. It's been a rather long process. I think it's important for Sweden to, as quickly as possible, enter, although I don't see an imminent threat towards Sweden.
And back to the NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg. He had a brief meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden in Vilnius before the start of the meetings. The U.S. President thanked him for leading the alliance at what he called a historical moment. Mr. Stoltenberg again reiterated how much of an impact Sweden's membership would be for NATO.
This summit is already historic. Because the agreement we made yesterday will make Sweden a full member of NATO. And that will make our alliance even more capable of defending all allies. At this meeting, we will also send a clear message to Ukraine that we stand by them as long as needed, and also that we agree on a united and positive message on the path forward for Ukraine and membership for Ukraine.
You continue to be you're trusted. No one knows the situation we're facing better than you do. And this is a historic moment. The adding of Finland and Sweden to NATO is consequential, and your leadership really matters.
Away from today's NATO summit, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says efforts by the United Nations to ensure the implementation of the Russian part of the Black Sea grain export deal had not yet yielded results. Mr. Lavrov told a press conference after meeting foreign ministers from the Gulf Cooperation Council that the deal had not been fulfilled at all and that they had been hearing for many months from the UN, which is going to great pains, which have yielded no results. Moscow has repeatedly said it sees no grounds to extend the grain deal, which enables Ukraine to export cereals from its Black Sea ports beyond July 17. It argues that commitments made to remove obstacles to Russian food and fertilizer exports have not been fulfilled.